BioWare have bad news. They haven't been decimated. They have in fact been decimated twice over because up to 20% of BioWare is now gone. Now you may think 20%, okay, that's a lot, but it's not going to be catastrophic. The problem here, as my research team has really dove into, is that these are staff that have been around for a long time and who know a lot. So let's dive into the story. BioWare have dropped a blog update that doesn't really have a direct progress update on their new games. Instead, we got a message that was intended to be a part of a, quote, process that was handled with empathy, respect, and clear communications. And with that, their general manager, Gary McKay, announced that 50 staff from BioWare would be laid off. Per Eurogamer's reporting, that could reflect nearly 20% of their total employees being dismissed. Now, the last public data we have on them is about 320 employees as of 2019. But of course, this is 50 people going. Now, you've also got to remember Star Wars The Old Republic, that is their MMO handled by the Austin office. Well, not for that much longer, actually, because it's now being developed by Broadsword as a third-party studio. That obviously has the potential to mean layoffs for Austin as well. Now, all of this seems to be part of broader layoffs announced at Electronic Arts this March that would see 6% of their whole employee workforce laid off. Now, they say this is part of a long-term vision that will preserve the health of the studio and enable us to do what we do best: create exceptional, story-driven, single-player experiences filled with vast worlds and rich characters. So it does appear that multiplayer, loot-driven, forever games like Anthem are no longer on the cards. Sad that, we had to lose so much to learn that one. But per VentureBeat's reporting, this is actually only the tip of the iceberg. There is more. It goes deeper. The bulk of the layoffs are coming from BioWare's Edmonton office. Now, if you're familiar with BioWare, you'll know that Edmonton, that's like, OG BioWare. Later on, they'd open up a Montreal studio. Now, that's the Montreal studio that tried, of course, to deliver Mass Effect Andromeda. That ended up failing, and that studio was then merged into EA Motive, who, as an example, gave us Star Wars Squadrons and are working on more things now. Anyway, now that you've got a little bit of the sort of history and the context of BioWare, they're also, this is also seeing EA cut off a collaboration with a third-party QA service. So VentureBeat were told that Keywords, who are a firm that provide QA testing, had been unable to reach a new contract with Electronic Arts, and their current one will be ending on the 27th of September. So, does this count as layoffs? No. Does this count as a very large quantity of people no longer working with BioWare? Yes, it does. Apparently, they couldn't basically agree on terms. The Keywords contract, essentially, their requirements exceeded what EA and BioWare needed, given the change in the development approach at the studio. And that's something we'll get into in a bit, because they seemingly are trying to change things up. Again, you sort of think like BioWare, what's the last successful game that they've done? Like uncontroversially successful, that is not a remake or a remaster. And you do unfortunately have to go back quite a bit in time to find that, because Anthem ate up so many resources from across their studios and wasted just so much damn time. Now, VentureBeat also pointed out that in June 2022, a team within Keywords voted to unionize. So who knows if that's got anything to do with the contract negotiations. That obviously ended up failing, leading to this QA studio no longer being a expense on BioWare's sheet. Okay, so then, BioWare was due a round of layoffs as a part of a wider policy. But you may be thinking, what about Dreadwolf? So why, just as Dragon Age Dreadwolf is in the later stages of development, would we see so many cuts to a team that should be gearing up for even more development on their next big RPG with the next Mass Effect game? Or perhaps DLC, additional content for Dreadwolf, right? It doesn't really make that much sense. And what's going to make even less sense is when we see later on who's actually got the sack here, because it's rough. Now, it is worth noting, the studio statement explicitly says that they have taken these layoffs now because there are other EA studios that are hiring, right? There are many other positions available, and we know that EA in recent years have been happy enough to invest in new teams and to open up new studios. As an example, stuff for games like Skate. Also for the Battlefield narrative efforts and their upcoming Marvel titles, okay? So there's actually plenty of money floating around from EA that's kind of earmarked for future projects. And while not everybody will be able to find a job there, at the very least, they would hope that some of their people who are very tenured will be able to get other roles at, at an EA studio. You imagine they'd be able to facilitate or fast track that kind of thing. And then you may be thinking like, hang on a second, Michael. So you're telling me that EA are cutting 6% of staff, but they're also hiring loads of staff, and BioWare has not just been decimated, which, decimated, that's 10, like 1 in every 10 Roman soldiers, gets the right, that's what decimated comes from, but if they lose nearly 20%, that's double decimated. So how does this make sense? Well, I think for a lot of this, you want to, it's them doing like the very, top tier, right? Like just corporate cost cutting. But I think it's reflecting that, kind of reflecting that thing where as a company grows, every decision that it makes, be it staffing new department, hiring, is not necessarily perfect, right? So a lot of them, they grow and then they're like, okay, it's time to prune the hedges. And they contract a little bit, trim the fat, optimize their operations, while potentially even investing into some new areas, right? It's just like kind of part of the corporate cycle, you could say. Because at the end of the day, if you have to retain every single person that you hire forever, then you're essentially saying as a business, we only make perfect decisions and we are unwilling to change. So it is one of those things that at face value does seem like a little bit challenging to contend with. The idea that we've got job cuts, but also lots of open roles at studios. But at least in their own logic, there is a way that actually makes sense. And speaking of making sense, the vast majority of people who watch this show actually are not subscribed to the channel. So be sure to hit that button. Me and my team, we're here to give you content almost every single day. And because of your support, I'm not just a one-man band trying to do all of this. Like myself, we've got Connor, who's researching, writing stories, Connell handling the editing, and that means we can specialize into everything to actually get for you guys the most synthesized stories. So whenever I'm actually sitting down to report this stuff, to chat about it with you, it's all what Ready went through, like our own editorial processes, and we've tried to grab everything into one place so that you've got the best understanding of the story. So yeah, drop a like for the algorithm, it truly does help, and be sure to subscribe. Right then, let's get to November 2021, because this is when a new Mass Effect game would be announced, right? There's been the drip feeding of teases, art, and very minor prototyping updates since then. So the next game in that franchise is a very long way off. It is confirmed in this post from their general manager that it is still in the pre-production phase. Now, in October 2022, BioWare and EA announced that Dragon Age Dreadwolf was actually alpha complete and that the game was playable from start to finish. And this came after accounts of multiple changes in the direction of the game, pivoting from a live service back to being a single-player BioWare-style RPG. Of course, the story here is that after the humongous success of Mass Effect 2, EA pretty much said, right, Mass Effect 3, you better have that out quickly, and we want a multiplayer element, and we want it to be a live service. Of course, they then found there was people who actually were dropping like $14,000 on the kind of like loot box upgrade things that were in the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer. That then led to this very, very broad push, right, for more of this stuff. That, yes, is probably what led to Anthem being a thing. It's also what led to so many problems with Dragon Age. Because they at one point were saying, oh no, like, this is a single player game, but hey, you can do all these live multiplayer things as well. They've since had to walk that back and back and back. So that, yes, now with Dreadwolf, they're actually going back to what their studio can do. Now, at the time, that was something said to reassure, right, the players and industry pundits that Dragon Age was still on track. And in fact, that any time between then and the eventual release of the game was going to be spent on iteration and so on this game that had reached alpha. But then in February 2023, footage of a test build leaked alongside some tester commentary. Now, this is something we covered at the time. The footage confirmed that the game would follow in the more action style of Inquisition, which is really something that never was in doubt. BioWare had always been rewarded with better sales every time they've gone in that direction. I mean, hey, Mass Effect 1, I do love that game. God damn, that gunplay is not really that fun. But it's fair to say that with Baldur's Gate 3 doing so well, and that being turn-based, who knows? Who knows? Anyway, to get back to the story, this build was in a relatively beta state. It was missing textures, missing dialogue, and much else. So even then, right, BioWare were actively developing the game. This was not just a case of having everything, perfectly in place and polishing. And while some were optimistic that it could launch in 2023, including us in our 2022 retrospective series, the sheer passage of time without any significant update does mean that this game is at least 2024, right? So that means that people are still very actively developing Dragon Age Dreadwolf now. And that raises the question, what is happening, perhaps even with this game, or the company that's leading to this happening? And why is the Edmonton office being particularly affected when they are the people who, are making that game? Okay, so let's get into the mercenary realities of game development. So first, some facts about the Canadian province of Alberta. Its capital, Edmonton, is where BioWare's central office is based. And in 2018, the local government introduced tax credits for game development, covering 25% of labor expenditure, and then an extra 5% on any underrepresented class of employee. This, however, was scrapped because of budget tightening in 2019, and then in 2022, those tax credits were reintroduced. Not for games, though, only for film and television. This is the sort of thing that many places have got. Indeed, like our studio benefits from tax credits, and certainly being able to recoup those or get those tax credits on a project that you've completed, it really it helps with your studio finances, right? It definitely helps more companies exist and weather the storms of game development. Now, that's me speaking from the indie perspective. When you are a massive studio like this, I mean, you're dealing with truly gargantuan amounts of money. So BioWare, of course, has got a studio in Texas. Texas offers a 22.5% tax credit on games projects, and they also had one in Montreal, which, of course, as I said, got turned into EA Motive. So between these two studios, one has got more cost-effective staff, and it is not the one that's in Canada, because they've scrapped the tax credit. And that tax credit is, hey, would you like a 25% off coupon on labor? Losing that's going to sting, especially when you know that your Texas people are that much cheaper. So if you wanted to cut costs in your studio, regardless of any consideration of talent or humanity, that would be one of the main factors that you would consider. This is from David Gator, right? Absolutely gutted at the news of even more layoffs at BioWare. Not just headcount reduction, but laying off some of their most senior and likely most expensive staff, people who deserve more loyalty than this. My heart goes out to those affected. David Gator is one of the biggest names in the history of the Dragon Age franchise. Now, per Jeff Grubb's sources, there's not going to be a Dragon Age release for some time yet, and that, of course, means more spend and more risk. There were initially expectations on a September 2023 launch for Dreadwolf, but that essentially may keep shifting. Grubb personally expects summer 2024, but that could shift to the end of fiscal year 2024, which I suppose then would be Q1 2025. And if I was a betting man, I would put it February, March 2025, which stings, but I mean, maybe it is what it is. And in terms of the ongoing work, the Dreadwolf team going forward will be supplemented by people who were previously on the Mass Effect project. So if you were more interested in Mass Effect, yeah, chances have probably went down. Now, also EA corporate culture and stuff like that has changed. Ultimate Team is no longer something, the Ultimate Team business model. It's not something that's, applying to the non-sports titles since the EA Sports and EA Games split. So they kind of, I suppose, need to balance their books more clearly. There's also additionally been some refocusing of internal expectations around Apex as well. It still is making stacks of money, but EA had high expectations for the last few seasons that actually were not met by the game. So taken with the fact that it's a driving source of revenue for EA Games now, that means that everything else has got to make up the difference of Apex falling below a little bit. Now, some connecting of dots is being done here. I cannot, we cannot prove the impact of these things. We can only speculate. But it does, I think, suggest a little bit of a bleak picture of some short-sighted management decisions here, ones that are unconcerned with the actual people making the games, which, for a game like Dreadwolf, very tenured writers are going to be important for doing a BioWare game good. But yes, making games is a business. That sometimes does mean hard decisions. Now, it's important here to understand that there are games released every year that are, very passionate, hyper-targeted, and delivering specific fantasies that players want. And then guess what happens? The studios die because they couldn't make enough money off them. That is a hard reality. It's actually what happens to most indies. Most indies do not survive past their first game. That is just what it's like, because look, at the end of the day, what's the thing the customer cares about? It's the final product. That's the thing, buying it, that actually keeps people employed. And I think that attitude is rife in their statement, that it almost doesn't matter who is making, Dreadwolf or any future projects. It matters that they get made, that they get given to fans. And that's why they say that the development of the game will be unimpacted by the departure of 50 people. Most people won't notice. But maybe they should. Because only caring about the final product is an attitude that tells management they can get away with laying off people like this. Maybe they don't fully respect that final product, because looking into who's gone, it's hard for me to believe that it won't be impacted. So, as a way of making these layoffs and the impact clear, here's a few people. So, narrative programmer Tim Griffith, Foundation technical director John Renish, development manager Brian K. Lee, writer, narrative designer Mary Kirby, who is somebody that I think we should focus on, because Kirby is deeply embedded within the core of what Dragon Age is. The co-creator of Dragon Age, David Gator, said, BioWare laid off Varric's creator, mistress of the Canary, writer of the chant, who was there since Dragon Age's inception. How incredibly sad. I'll echo others saying that any studio in need of narrative experience should grab her up immediately. So that's just an example, right, of this person who was fired made a bunch of characters that people really liked. And the thing is, it's that ability to hold on to those staff and have them accrue skills and be able to bring those skills to bear effectively. That is what has led to a game like Baldur's Gate 3. Because where BioWare went completely in the wrong direction, away from its core competency, and cocked everything up, what did Larian do? Larian stuck to what they knew. With Divinity Original Sin, they were able to do a Hail Mary, I believe, that had them dodging bankruptcy. And, since then, things have been extremely successful for them. And they've just been able to, specialize down and become the best at doing what they do, which is what BioWare could and should have been. Of course, Larian are making Baldur's Gate 3, the very long-awaited sequel to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. From BioWare. Indeed, many of the people laid off in today's story joined BioWare in the wake of Baldur's Gate's creation in the late 90s. So it's a pretty insane time. These layoffs risk being very short-sighted actions that will ultimately fail to serve developers, the industry, players, or even the games themselves, all while dressing it up as a promise that Dreadwolf is coming, that it is being developed, and that you will get to play it. It's a pretty damn sad situation that, nigh on a decade of BioWare, probably more if you think about pre-production, has been utterly wasted by the completely moronic decisions of management. But that is, folks, where we are at. That's where I've got to leave it today. Let me know what you think. Hard to see anyone thinking this is good. But anyway, we'll have content on the channel tomorrow. In fact, our team's working on that right now. So be sure to sub for that, and I'll see you next time.